Every part of the farm represented hard work, challenge, a great deal of planning, a lot of knowledge, curiosity, surprises of many kinds, among other things. But it also represented much beauty, accomplishment, and satisfaction, as well as joy. The woods about which I spoke did all that for us. In spring, the woods were a thing of beauty, which artists could paint, writers could write about, and musicians could record. For instance, the swamps were a symphony of sound starting in March, the spring of the year, when all living winter-dormant creatures awakened to make known their existence. How I loved to listen to those frogs and turtles in the swamps or ponds, for that matter. Even the birds in the trees chirped all day long, preparing their nests and so forth, while singing their own little tunes. Each bush, plant, and tree leafed and bloomed at its appointed time. Each had its own type of leaf and flower, never ceasing to amuse and excite us. The woods were full of bloom. It was a challenge to be able to name the flower or the bird or the animal and then speak about it. The wild berry plants, the wild azaleas in their yellows and pinks, or we called them swamp apples. The wild dogwood trees or bushes in whites and pinks, and the beautiful mountain laurel, that's Connecticut's state flower, which grew in abundance through our woods. How we admired it, because wherever we went, it was there to be admired. Along the country roads, it literally covered the sides of it, together with the wild azaleas. The azaleas, which grew to perhaps even 15 feet in height or so, seemed to just hang over the roads, adding to the beauty of country travel. Now, most of these country roads have been widened to accommodate more modern transportation, and many of these bushes have been destroyed, but they are still there to be enjoyed. That is why it is a pleasure to take trips out into the country in early spring when these bushes are in bloom. When I was teaching in Hebron, I loved going through Rattlesnake Ledge Road because it was so picturesque. In winter it was beautiful too, with the glistening icicle-laden boughs hanging over the dirt road, although it wasn't so nice during rainy seasons because of the mud. I remember getting stuck at the foot of the hill, wondering how I would get home. I still had almost a mile to go. My brothers saw a light shining straight up into the sky. They realized I was extremely late coming home. "I'll bet that's Jenny stuck at the bottom of that hill. Let's go find out," they said. Sure enough, there they were, Bruno and Joe. Was I ever glad to see them. They turned my car around forcibly, and then we went the long way home. The beauty, for that moment, of that road was gone. It was just beautiful mud, only beautiful mud. Now, one of the most beautiful flowering trees in the woods were the apple trees. Here and there, among the brambles near swamps, throughout the cow pastures and bushes, they grew, bearing much fruit, especially during bountiful years. Now, just how they became planted there, whether it was birds that dropped the seeds or whether perhaps long, long ago people really had fruit trees growing there, and of course some of the homes disappeared. Well, anyway, the cows loved the apples. So, almost every day, especially after a rainfall or a windstorm, we had to go with burlap bags and pick the apples off the ground before the cows got there ahead of us. You see, these cows wouldn't graze when there were apples on the ground. They would eat and eat and eat them until they couldn't stand on their feet. They would get drunk on these sour apples. Also, when that happened, the cows gave no milk that night. They couldn't even come home. They were so wobbly. None of these apples were real good cooking or baking apples. They had become wild because they were not cared for. No pruning, no nothing. But I'll tell you, they made good cider. In town, there was a cider mill to which we and others, other farmers that is, brought these wind-blown and even the picked apples off homegrown trees. These apples were crushed, squeezed, and the juice poured into wooden barrels. If you didn't bring an empty barrel with you, when you brought the apples to the mill to be made into cider, you could buy a barrel there. The cider mill owner always had nice fresh barrels to sell. The juice was corked in the barrel, brought home, and then placed in the cellar, where it had to ferment for a number of weeks before being sealed tightly. You see, the cork had to be removed to allow that fermentation to take place. One year, my father sealed the barrel before it was ready, and it kept on fermenting while sealed. Well, one night while we were all sleeping, we heard a rolling in the cellar, back and forth, back and forth. Who could be rolling the barrel of cider? No one was there to be doing that. Then all of a sudden there was a big bang. The barrel exploded by the fermented gas from within. However, we did have some nice sweet cider to drink, and much, much later, I guess, those who liked it could have Applejack, which was a real strong cider drink. We used to siphon the cider out of the barrel with a hose. You put one end of the hose into the opening of the barrel and the other end in your mouth and draw the juice through it as you would in using a straw to drink your soda. After the juice started flowing, we would quickly take the hose out of our mouth and put it into the pitcher, which would then get filled. The pitcher had to be lower than the top of the barrel. Otherwise, the cider wouldn't continue flowing, and we had to try again. Sometimes we had to do it again and again before we got that siphoning to work. I often siphoned cider out of the barrel when it was sweet apple juice, not when it became strong cider. Sometimes this strong cider was allowed to age in the barrel for years, at which time it became cider vinegar. Okay?